audio lecture of Unit 1B, Ancient World Religions and Belief Systems. The development and codification of belief systems. Codify means to write down, like a legal code. During the classical period that we will be talking about later, all of the world's major religions emerged or evolved significantly except for Islam. Now, some of these religions had origins before the classical period, but others came about later. Ancient religions like Brahmanism, with the Hindu synthesis, and the monotheistic beliefs of the Hebrews, also known as Judaism, evolved during the classical period, but were around before the classical period. New religions emerged ultimately from the Jewish traditions, religions like Christianity and later Islam, and Vedic traditions, the old Hindu traditions like Buddhism and Jainism. Philosophies emerged in China. Confucianism and Daoism, although sometimes referred to like religions, are really more philosophies than religions because they do not really have deities that they focus on. Instead, they provide various worldviews. Belief systems form the basis of communication, common standards of ethics, and trust among people throughout the world. Religions and belief systems were unique to their own cultures, but all of them provided answers to human existence, to the nature of society, and to the world. Religions also influence political systems and social stratification. This we will come across in almost every culture we study this entire year in this course. Religions created internal conflicts sometimes within states and empires due to the diversity of practices of those religions. We'll talk about those throughout this year as well. Let's start by talking about Judaism. Around 2000 BC, Hebrews were the first people to develop the concept of monotheism, or the worship of one God. This one God referred to as Yahweh. The early Hebrews were nomadic peoples, but by around 2000 BC, they were settling in Mesopotamian cities in the Fertile Crescent region. The Hebrews were influenced by the Mesopotamians because they lived among them for so many years. They were influenced by things like Hammurabi's Code of Law, which we'll discuss in a later unit, and the flood stories from the Mesopotamian religion is similar to the flood story in the Hebrew or Hebrew religion or Judaism. Around 1850 BC, Abraham led his people, which will be known as the Hebrews, to Palestine. In the Hebrew faith, God led them to their promised land. The Hebrew faith in their God enabled this to happen. I will give you many descendants, and some of them will be kings. You will have so many descendants that they will become nations. I will keep my promise to you and your descendants in future generations as an everlasting covenant. I will be your God and the God of your descendants, saith the Lord. Around 1750 BC, some Hebrews ended up migrating to Egypt. They were enslaved there for a period of time, as we know, and then eventually the Exodus moves them back to Palestine with Moses. All of this will be discussed in more detail in a later unit. Palestine is located on the eastern shore of the Mediterranean Sea, prime real estate in the ancient and classical worlds. Jerusalem is located there. And as you can see, it's kind of a crossroads for Europe, Africa, and Asia. Palestine was at this crossroads of trade routes between Egypt, Arabia, and Mesopotamia, and ultimately this made that area prime real estate. Moving forward between 1000 and 930 BC, Hebrew tribes united to form finally the Kingdom of Israel under King David and then his son, King Solomon. By 930 BC, Israel broke apart. There was division between two parts of the kingdom, and the northern part of the kingdom will be called the Kingdom of Israel, and the Kingdom of Judah will be in the south. The Kingdom of Judah will maintain the capital city of Jerusalem. Again, this will be discussed in more detail in a later lecture. Moving forward, around 722 BCE, Israel would be conquered by a new group of people, a new empire that had been on the rise in the Middle East called the Assyrians. They will be treated brutally by the Assyrians, as evidenced by the scriptures written in the Old Testament. Eventually, they will also then come under the captivity around 586 BC of the New Babylonians, also known as the Neo-Babylonians or the Chaldeans. They will conquer the kingdom of Judea. We'll talk about both of these societies in a later unit. The Assyrians, of course, shown here, impaling Jews on spikes. This shows you the cruel nature of which the Assyrians ruled over the Jews. The Hebrews that were captured by the Babylonians were known as Jews, and they were allowed to maintain religious and cultural identity. The Torah, which included the scriptures and the Old Testament of the Bible that the Jews followed, teaches the founding and the beliefs of Judaism. The Torah was written by Hebrew scholars beginning around 1000 BC. Reading religious texts was the most important task for Jews. It's even more important than religious leaders. The actual reading of the texts is where you can commune with God. Jews see God as omniscient, omnipotent, and omnipresent. Ultimately, Yahweh becomes known as God with a capital G. And as we will eventually see, Christianity, as an offshoot of Judaism, receives God the Father, God the Son in Jesus, and God the Holy Spirit, 3 in 1, 1 in 3. From the Psalms, we see, "Blessed is everyone who fears the Lord, who walks in his ways. You shall eat the fruit of the labor of your hands. You shall be happy, and it shall be well with you. Your wife will be like a fruitful vine without your house. Your children will be like olive shoots around your table. Lo, thus shall the man be blessed who fears the Lord." God showed compassionate love towards those who obeyed him. And the Ten Commandments become the rules that guided the relationship between people and God. These Ten Commandments had been given to Moses on Mount Sinai during the Exodus, which we'll discuss in a later unit. The Jews believed that they were God's chosen people. Therefore, they did not try to convert other people. They believed that they were chosen by God as a special race, a special ethnic group that were the chosen people of God. So it was not a proselytizing or an evangelical faith. you were born into Judaism. The children of Israel is what they will be called. Judaism 101. Jews worship in a synagogue or a temple, and the Sabbath, the day of rest, is Saturday. It really begins sundown Friday night and lasts until sundown Saturday night. What's kosher? Meat from animals that 1. Chew their cud, and 2. Have cloven hooves are kosher, including sheep, cows, goats, and deer. The camel, the rock badger, the hare, rodents, reptiles, amphibians, and the pig are not kosher. No shellfish either, and no insects. The method of slaughter is also important for meat to remain kosher. It has to be quick, a deep, quick stroke across the throat with a perfectly sharp blade with no nicks or unevenness. Jews cannot eat animals that died of natural causes. These were laws given to them by God in the Old Testament to keep them healthy in the times that they were living. Jewish holidays. Of course, there's Passover. Passover commemorates the escape of the Hebrews from Egypt as God plagued the Egyptians. Then there's Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year, which is celebrated in September. Then Yom Kippur, the holiest day of the year, the day of atonement and repentance of one's sins. And then there's Hanukkah, the festival of lights, commemorating the rededication of the Jewish temple in Jerusalem around the 100s AD or CE, the Common Era. The diaspora occurred. The diaspora is when the Jews were forced out of their homeland. They were expelled from Palestine by the Romans. The Wailing Wall. There are about 14 million Jews in the world today. 5.3 million in the US, 5.4 million in Israel. Judaism ultimately had a huge influence on the development of Christianity, born out of Judaism, as Christ was a Jew, and Islam. These are the two largest religions in the world today. More of those in later units as well. It's important to remember that Christianity and Islam and Judaism are all known as Abrahamic faiths because all of them trace their roots back to Abraham. Now let's talk about Hinduism. The Aryans developed Hinduism during the Vedic Age in the Indus River Valley in India. We'll talk more about the culture in a later unit. Hinduism is among the oldest and most complex religions in the world. Hinduism has no founder and no single religious text. The Aryan priests taught values through hymns collected in what is known as the Vedas, or sacred text. The Upanishads is a collection of Vedic texts offering basic explanations of Hindu beliefs. In order to realize the self, renounce everything. Having cast off all objects, assimilate yourself to that which remains. When all longings that are in the heart vanish, then a mortal becomes immortal and attains Brahman, which is infinite consciousness. Here. That is the object or goal of Hinduism, to reunite with the immortal, infinite consciousness known as Brahman. Those who are clever in arguments about Brahman, but are without the action pertaining to Brahman, meaning infinite consciousness, and who are greatly attached to the world, those certainly are born again and again in this world through their ignorance. You see, if you are reincarnated and born again and again in this world, you have not reached Brahman, infinite consciousness. The goal is to end the cycle of reincarnation and get to Brahman, infinite consciousness. As rivers flowing down become indistinguishable on reaching the sea by giving up their names and forms, so also the illumined soul, having become freed from name and form, reaches the self-engulfing supreme self, Brahman. Around 500 BC, changes called Brahmanism made Hinduism more complex. Brahmin are priests that attain supreme power. Brahman is the attempt to reach the universal soul or consciousness. So you need to understand the difference. The spelling is different. One is with an A and one is with an I. The caste system emerged during the Brahmanic era. All people must perform the social duties designated to their caste. The four main castes are as such. Brahmins are priests, Kshatriya are the warriors, Vaishyas are the middle class merchants, and the Shudras are the lower caste, the peasants. Included also would be eventually subcastes with specific roles in society. Below the Shudras were the untouchables. People were born into their caste with no chance of social mobility initially. Socializing, marriage outside of your caste, etc., was forbidden. The untouchables, as I mentioned before, were really social outcasts. They were below everyone else in the caste system. Not really even in the caste system, but below it. And they were the ones that performed degrading jobs and lived in separate communities, away from everyone else. Here are some words that refer to untouchables listed up here. 16% of the population are in the untouchable caste. Untouchables. The Mahabharata is the world's longest poem, and it was written during the late Vedic Age, which included a story called the Bhagavad Gita. In the Bhagavad Gita, the god Krishna explains that the Atman, or the soul, is eternal and cannot be destroyed. The Hindu concept of reincarnation proposes that the Atman can live in innumerable bodies or life forms for years and years. 8.4 million forms of life exist. The Atman ultimately seeks reunion with the universal soul or the universal spirit of Brahman. When a person dies, the Atman might achieve reunification with Brahman, or it could be born into a new body through reincarnation. The Atman is your true self, your universal spirit, your essence, your soul. Dharma is the set of duties a person has in life, and the Dharma is determined by one's caste, their gender, and their age. Dharma equals duty. Karma is different. Karma is the continuing measure of the actions in an individual's life. Fulfilling your dharma or your duty brings you good karma in your life. Karma can be seen through one's thoughts, through one's words, and through one's actions that we perform ourselves, through actions others also do under our instructions. These are all things that can influence our karma. The reward for members of lower castes that fulfill their dharma is to have their Atman reincarnated ultimately into a higher caste in the next life, eventually reaching the universal soul of Brahman. Patience, forgiveness, piety or self control, honesty, sanctity, control of senses, reason, knowledge or learning, truthfulness, an absence of anger, non-violence, truth, non-coveting, purity of body and mind, control of senses. These are all the essence of Dharma. Only members of the highest caste, Brahmins, the priestly caste, are eligible to be reunited with the universal spirit. In other words, you have to work your way up through the caste system through reincarnation to eventually reach Brahman. This is the way it was in the olden days. The epic tale of the Ramayana tells the story of the ideal man, who's Rama, and the ideal woman, Sita, who was devoted and submissive to her husband. It is difficult to classify Hinduism because the many gods, it's very polytheistic, are all part of the universal spirit, which seems monotheistic. Each of the gods is an avatar, a portion of the universal spirit. So the universal spirit is divided up into the thousands of different deities. That's the best way I can explain it, not being a Hindu myself. The universal spirit is represented by Brahman, that title we said before, Brahman with an A. Brahman is a god or an entity, a spirit, a goal, a soul, universal soul, that has countless forms and unites all. Vishnu is the god that was the creator god, and Shiva is the destroyer god. These are two major forms of Brahman, the creator and the destroyer, the two sides of the same coin of the universal soul of Brahman. Here's Vishnu the preserver, and here is Shiva the destroyer. Hinduism is the third largest religion in the world today, with about 960 million adherents. The holy cow. The cow is respected as a caregiver or mother in India. It provides milk, and its dung is used to heat homes. Eating beef is strictly forbidden among practicing Hindus. Now let's talk about Buddhism. Some Hindu reformers in the classical era sought to bypass powerful Brahmins or priests and their continued emphasis on sacrifice, rituals, and spells. And so ultimately they will have a break off from the traditional Hindu religion to form something anew. Reformers sought salvation from the cycle of birth and death, reincarnation. And they sought this salvation by meditating about human nature and the universal spirit. These reformers, also known as ascetics, were indifferent about worldly matters and possessions. They sought only oneness with the universal spirit, Brahman. It was around the 500s BC that the most important of these reformers came about. His name was Siddhartha Gautama. He was the son of a Hindu prince. Siddhartha was dissatisfied with Hinduism because he saw it as not offering answers to the meaning of life nor an explanation for human suffering. Siddhartha left home. He became an ascetic, dedicated to self-discipline and a disregard for material things. Siddhartha shaving his head to become an ascetic is depicted here in this bas-relief sculpture. Siddhartha eventually rejected asceticism and found his own path to salvation. This will form the basis of Buddhism. Siddhartha, later called the Buddha or Enlightened One. The Four Noble Truths is at the heart of Buddhism. The Four Noble Truths are that 1. All life is suffering. 2. Suffering is caused by desire. 3. Suffering is cured by removing desire. And 4. Following the Eightfold Path is what helps you achieve this. This is the noble truth of suffering. Birth is suffering. Aging is suffering. Illness is suffering. Death is suffering. Sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair are suffering. Union with what is displeasing is suffering. Separation from what is pleasing is suffering. Not to get what one wants is suffering. This is the noble truth of the origin of suffering. It is this craving which leads to renewed existence, meaning reincarnation, not being able to reach Brahman. It's accompanied by delight and lust, seeking delight here and there, that is, craving for sensual pleasures, craving for existence, craving for extermination. This is the noble truth of the cessation of suffering. It is the fading away and cessation of that same craving, the giving up and the relinquishing of it, freedom from it, non-reliance on it. The Eightfold Path represents a middle way between worldly pursuits and asceticism, how one can reach Brahman. The Eightfold Path includes changing one's thoughts, intentions, lifestyle, actions through meditation. The ultimate goal of Buddhism is to reach nirvana, which is a state of contentment achieved by unifying a person's soul with the universal spirit, otherwise known as Brahman. 5 moral rules of conduct are also part of Buddhism, and they include no killing of living things, no stealing, no lying, no alcohol, and no sexy time. The teachings of the Buddha contain texts called sutras. The Tripitaka, or 3 baskets of wisdom, included sutras and other Buddhist teachings. Here you see 81,000 wooden blocks containing the Tripitaka. The Buddha denied the existence of the Atman and the caste system. People are not born into castes, only with the ability to do good or evil, say the Buddhists. Buddhism accepts Hindu concepts of karma, dharma, and reincarnation, however, but their goal is to get beyond that. The Buddha forbade followers from worshiping him as a god. It would not be until later that Siddhartha Gautama was viewed as a deity, much later. The Buddhist doctrine of nirvana was appealing. It's contentment in this life versus having to go through many lives. And the belief that all people of all social statuses can achieve it. So it was not based upon the caste system. As a matter of fact, the Buddhist doctrine did not believe in the caste system. It rejected it. This would be appealing to many people. Buddhism's appeal to common people is comparable to Christianity. Christianity was also seen as a movement that was popular among the common people. The Buddha spread his beliefs throughout India despite Hindu opposition. Hinduism eventually will adopt some Buddhist ideas. The Hindu priests began stressing individual salvation and viewed the Buddha as the incarnation of the god Krishna. By the 200s BC, Buddhism peaked in India when Emperor Ashoka of the Mauryan Empire converted to Buddhism. We'll talk more about that later. After Ashoka's death, Buddhism declined in India. It almost essentially disappeared in India, but it will spread to other areas of the world. Buddhism will spread to Southeast Asia, China, and Japan, following trade routes, adapted it to their own culture and beliefs, most of these areas. China's Magao Caves, part of the Buddhist tradition, found inside. Zen Buddhism. We are what we think. All that we are arises with our thoughts. With our thoughts, we make the world. Speak or act with an impure mind, and trouble will follow you. In this world, hate never yet dispelled hate. Only love dispels hate. This is the law, ancient and exhaustible. Zen Buddhism was a Japanese form of Buddhism. So now we move on to Confucianism, which, as I said before, is more of a philosophy really than a religion because there is no deity involved in Confucianism. Around 551 BC, or BCE, Confucius was born into a noble family during the Warring States period in China. This was a time when the country was not united. We will cover this period in a later unit. After some experience in the provincial government, which is the local government, Confucius became a wandering teacher. He had become a bit disillusioned with what he saw as some corrupt officials in the provincial governments. He thought a lot about governance, and he ultimately started to teach about the best way to govern. Confucius taught through parables, kind of like Jesus did, and also short aphorisms, which illustrated concepts rather than proving them. So the truth of things could not really be fully proven, but he would illustrate the concepts through stories or illustrations. His followers ultimately collected his sayings and wrote them down in a collection known as the Analects. Sometimes it's called the Analects of Confucius. These teachings ultimately form the basis of Chinese culture and what will become known as Confucianism. Sayings from the Analects of Confucius show you that really it goes beyond good governance. 1. The ability will never catch up with the demand for it. 2. An oppressive government is more to be feared than a tiger. 3. And remember, no matter where you go, there you are. 4. Choose a job you love, and you will never have to work a day in your life. 5. Do not impose on others what you yourself do not desire. And 6. Everything has beauty, but not everyone sees it. It's more about wisdom and life than just governance. Here's some more. In a country well governed, poverty is something to be ashamed of. In a country badly governed, wealth is something to be ashamed of. It does not matter how slowly you go, as long as you do not stop. I like that one. It is easy to hate, and it is difficult to love. This is how the whole scheme of things works. All good things are difficult to achieve, and bad things are very easy to get. Life is really simple, but we insist on making it complicated. Do we ever? And never give a sword to a man who can't dance. I'm not really sure what that one means. Only the wisest and stupidest of men never change. Our greatest joy is not in never falling, but in rising every time we fall. Real knowledge is to know the extent of one's ignorance. Silence is a true friend who never betrays. Success depends upon previous preparation, and without such preparation, there is sure to be failure. You cannot open a book without learning something. Confucius' teachings were based on ancient Chinese traditions as well as mythology. They respected the virtues of the past and ultimately of the family relationships. Respect for the past, Confucius would argue, would restore balance, harmony, and order to society and to people's lives. Remember, he was living during the Warring States period. It was a chaotic period, and he was trying to get things back to the way they should be. Confucius blamed the Warring States period on unethical leaders and the Chinese people for having lost their vision. Confucius stressed kindness, his rules of propriety or decency, and Zhao. Zhao means filial piety, which also refers to the respect one has for their elders, and especially their male elders. Filial piety, quote, consists in not being disobedient. When they are alive, parents should be served according to the rules of propriety. After their death, they should be buried correctly, and sacrifices should be carried out in a proper manner. Confucius taught that strong relationships, and he thought there were 5 key relationships, were ultimately the foundation of all of society, with a clear hierarchy and people fulfilling their roles. If everyone fulfilled their duty to each other, then life would go back in balance. The relation between superiors and inferiors is like that between the wind and the grass. The grass must bend when the wind blows across it. The emperor ultimately must take care of his subjects, and they must obey the emperor. He is the father figure of the nation. First key relationship. A father must take care of a son, and the son must obey the father. Second key relationship. While a father or mother is alive, a son should not travel far. An older brother must take care of a younger brother who must obey him. A third key relationship. A husband must take care of his wife who must obey him. The fourth key relationship. And friends are equal and must be mutually caring and obedient toward one another. The fifth key relationship. All of Chinese society was based on this filial piety, which was based on these 5 key relationships. Confucius reinforced China's patriarchal social structure with these relationships. He also reinforced the emperor's power and saw inequality as essential for harmonious society. Virtue was not inborn, it was a learned behavior from one's parents, others in society, and especially the emperor. We all must reflect virtue so others can learn from us. He also taught people to follow the way, which was known as the Tao, in order to develop inner virtue. Rather than for the sake of legalist rewards or punishments, one should always follow the Tao to develop their own inner virtue, which would be reflected to others who would mimic it, and all of society would be in balance. Lead the people by laws and regulate them by punishments, and the people will simply try to stay out of jail, but will have no sense of shame. Lead the people by virtue, and they will have a sense of shame and, moreover, will become good. Confucius wanted government run by those whose virtue and learning merited their authority and respect. This was known as a meritocracy. Those who were the best, who acted the best, who had high virtue, who had achieved things through merit, through their learning and their merit. Meritocracy, promotion by merit. Education was seen as the road to advancement in society, therefore. If you think in terms of a year, plant a seed. If in terms of 10 years, plant trees. If in terms of 100 years, teach the people. Confucius. Ability, not heredity, was the key to an efficient government. So, not just inheriting your position, not just that dynastic cycle that they had always talked about in China, which we'll talk more about in a later unit, but maybe ability. People submit to virtuous leaders, but they revolt against dishonest ones. So, if the emperor does receive his power through heredity, he still has an obligation to be virtuous so the people will stay in line and will not rebel against him. Confucianism is a practical form of action that was accessible to all. Confucianism is a philosophy, though some practice it religiously. It's not really a religion, it's a philosophy. And Confucius felt unqualified to make statements about gods in the afterlife. Religion was not his realm. Confucianism remains influential in China and many other parts of Asia today, Japan in particular. Now let's talk about Daoism, which is kind of an offshoot of Confucianism in a way. Around the 600s to 300s of BC, we're not really sure when he was born, so we think probably closer to the 300s, but there's not really proof about that. There was a man, a wandering Chinese scholar named Lao Zi, and he founded Daoism. Ancient Chinese painting depicting the birth of Lao Zi. Lao Tzu's teachings were collected in a book called The Way of Virtue that he wrote, and Zhuang-zi, a collection of fables, poems, and sayings. The Tao is abstract and therefore has no form. It is neither bright and rising nor dark and sinking, cannot be grasped, and makes no sound. Without form or image, without existence. The form of the formless is beyond defining. It cannot be described. It is beyond our understanding. It cannot be called by any name. Standing before it, it has no beginning. Even when followed, it has no end. In the now, it exists. To present, apply it. Follow it well and reach its beginning. Lao Zi. So the Tao which sometimes is spelled with a D or a T, is still the way like it is in Confucianism. But this is putting a more spiritual spin on that notion. Taoism is a philosophy based on the way, the Tao. But Lao Zi rejected the Confucian notions of virtue. Instead, he said the Tao is limitless and inexpressible. It can't be bound just by virtue. It encompasses everything, virtue and vice. The Tao was passive rather than active, like Confucianism was active. The Tao is passive, eternal, and unchanging, so people can choose to live in harmony with it and with nature. People should nurture their qi, air, breath of life, to live in accordance with the Tao, the way. Lao Zi believed humans resisting the Tao is what caused chaos in the world. Taoism emphasizes introspection, a simple life, and search for inner peace and happiness. The yin and the yang is part of Taoism. Taoism stresses wu-wei, which is non-interference with the natural path of things and a detachment from worldly affairs, including government. This is where it differs from Confucianism. It's passive, not active. Confucianism is active, should be involved in your community, should do what you can in those 5 key relationships to make your community a better place. Taoism is passive. Only can balance be restored if people are moving only with the Tao. Passive. It is the practice of going against the stream by not struggling against it, but by standing still and letting the stream do all the work. Thus, the sage knows that relative to the river, he still moves against the current. To the outside world, the sage appears to take no action, but in fact, he takes action long before others ever foresee the need for action. Lao Zi. Standing firm. Non-violence. Taoists believed human nature was boundless, while Confucius believed virtue was learned. Lao Zi rejected the idea of a meritocracy. He said rulers should adapt to circumstances rather than obey rigid philosophies or plans of action. Taoist studies of alchemy and medicine ultimately will influence Chinese culture. Alchemy is the practice of trying to make chemical reactions change metals into other kinds of metals. And ultimately, that's sort of the beginning of pharmacy, really, of medicine making. Fire medicine is charcoal plus sulfur plus saltpeter. This was originally designed to be a medicine for everlasting life. What it is gunpowder. The Chinese developed gunpowder as fire medicine. Confucianism emphasizes action and extraversion, while Taoism stresses non-action and introspection. Confucius roams within society. Lao Zi wanders beyond it. Ancient Chinese saying. Chinese blend Confucianism in their daily public lives and Taoism in their private lives, ultimately. The yin and the yang, a Taoist symbol, represents balance and harmony between opposites. Sometimes you'll see it spelled the yin and the yang. Same thing. The white represents the feminine, passive, darkness, cold, weak, earth, moon. The black represents masculine, active, light, warmth, strong, heaven, sun. With the two mixed together, you have balance. The more laws and edicts are imposed, the worse, the more thieves and bandits there will be. To rule a country, one must act with care, as when frying a small fish. A truly good man is unaware of the good deeds he performs. Those who know the Tao do not speak of it. Those who speak of it do not know it. Be still like a mountain and flow like a great river. End learning. No more worries. Humans model themselves on earth, earth on heaven, heaven on the way, and the way on that which is naturally so. To conduct one's life according to the Tao is to conduct one's life without regrets, to realize that potential within oneself, which is of benefit to all. If you are depressed, you live in the past. If you are anxious, you live in the future. But if you are at peace, you live in the present. Traditional animist religions. The most ancient religions were actually animistic, worshiping spirits in nature. Individual societies adapted religions to fit their cultures, often merging them with ancient animist ideas and ancestor worship. Some of the earliest religions, like in the Paleolithic and Neolithic era, could be considered animist religions. Hinduism and Daoism clearly reveal some animist traditions, but all religions are influenced by animism ultimately. Nature and forces in nature incorporated into the religions. The gods causing those changes in nature, what have you. Christianity includes the importance of miracles, relics, and the importance of saints. Confucianism, Daoism, and Buddhism include reverence for ancestors and practice ancestral rites, all of which come from animist traditions. The three vinegar tasters. The three vinegar tasters are Confucius, Buddha, and Lao Zi, and each one's reaction is representative of their religion's attitude on life. Confucius sees the vinegar as sour and in need of correction. Just as society should be maintained through strict rules. Buddha recoils at the taste and sees it as being too extreme for the body and an example of the suffering of life. Lao Zi, on the other hand, recognizes that vinegar is what it is, and our perception of it is biased by our judgment of what it should be. New religions didn't spread to the Western Hemisphere until the late 1400s. Animism remained there until then. It happened later in the 1400s because of the Age of Exploration. In sub-Saharan Africa and parts of Asia, shamanism continued. Shamans, or high priests, were revered as healers and as links to the natural world, to the spirits within the natural world and within nature. Belief systems as unifying forces. Major religions and belief systems throughout history utilize the road systems and trade routes of classical civilizations in order for them to spread to other areas. This is part of cultural diffusion that we have been talking about as one of the major themes of our course this year. A great diversity of polytheistic religions were replaced by belief in a powerful single divine force with hopes of a peaceful afterlife. The cat here is just to represent animism, by the way. And the other, of course, is the heavens. The political uncertainties of the time helped these religions develop. Common people sought order in a chaotic society, comfort, and hope. This we will talk more about as we get to the classical period in particular. Belief systems also spread as more elaborate trade networks developed in the classical times. We'll talk more about that in later units as well. Religion facilitated long distance trade as localized customs replaced by belief in an all powerful deity imposing order on the world. Syncretism, which is the union or reconciliation of diverse tenets or practices, like a blending of religious practices. It occurred among many belief systems through cultural diffusion, a blending of things to try to create something that represented, both cultures that are now diffusing together. As classical civilizations collapsed, religions and belief systems continue to unite people and would shape the eras to come.